The sky above the barren planet was an unyielding shade of gray, devoid of any warmth. The land, jagged and lifeless, stretched out as far as the eye could see. Jagged rocks protruded from the earth like the bones of some ancient creature, and not a single trace of water or vegetation existed. It was a place where life went to die. And for one soul, that was exactly what was happening. Zara had been left for dead. Her body was battered, bruised, and on the verge of collapse. The remnants of her ship, a heap of twisted metal, lay in the distance, half buried in the sand, the fire of its explosion still smoldering weakly. The crash had been catastrophic, and she was the only survivor. Her once strong legs now felt like lead, her pulse sluggish, and her breathing shallow. She didn't know how long she had been lying here, alone, just trying to stay awake long enough to take another breath. The cold desert air stung her skin, but her mind was clouded. She'd tried to stand, to move, but her strength had long since abandoned her. The ache in her bones was unbearable, each movement sending waves of pain through her battered body. Her clothes were torn, and her face was covered in dirt, but none of that mattered anymore. Nothing mattered. She was alone in a place that could care less whether she lived or died. Every now and then, her eyes would flicker shut, as if her body was preparing to give in. But there was something inside her, that refused to let go. Maybe it was the will to survive, or maybe it was the remnants of hope that she could still find a way out. She didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't let herself succumb, not yet. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment, she thought she saw something, movement. A flicker on the horizon. Her heart skipped a beat, and she tried to focus, but her vision was too blurry. Was it just her mind playing tricks on her? She closed her eyes again, trying to will the dizziness away, but when she opened them a second time, it was there again. A figure. A human. She tried to raise her hand, to call out, but no sound came. Her voice was gone. The figure grew closer, and Zara's pulse quickened, her mind scrambling to make sense of what she was seeing. She had spent so long alone, and now someone was coming to help her. The figure was tall, draped in a long, flowing coat that billowed in the wind. Their features were hard to distinguish from this distance, but Zara could make out a faint outline of their face, human, unmistakably human. She didn't know if they had seen her yet, or if they had even noticed her existence. But something about the way they moved, the determined stride, made her feel a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever, hope. She fought to stay awake, her eyelids heavy, but the pain in her body forced her to stay alert, to hold on. As the figure drew closer, the world around her seemed to fade, the edges blurring until there was only the distant figure in her sights. And then, nothing. Her world went black. The twist. Zara woke, but she wasn't sure if she had truly awakened or if she had merely drifted into a dream. She could hear the hum of machinery around her, and there was a subtle warmth in the air, a contrast to the cold desert she had been abandoned on. Her head spun as she tried to piece together what had happened. The last thing she remembered was that figure, those faint, distant footsteps. "Easy now," a voice said, soothing and calm. It wasn't a voice she recognized. She blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the unfamiliar surroundings. The walls around her were metallic and sterile, not the rough terrain of the desert. She was lying on a cot, her body wrapped in bandages, her wounds treated. She could still feel the pain, but it was muted now. The world was quiet, almost too quiet, and the voice that spoke to her wasn't a voice from her world. She turned her head, and there he was. The man from the desert, standing at her bedside. He was older than her, his face weathered by age and experience, but his eyes were kind, calm, too calm for someone who had just saved her life. Zara didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to feel. The only thing that she could grasp in that moment was the simple, undeniable fact that this human, this stranger, had pulled her from death's grip. And now, they were about to begin a journey together, one neither of them could have ever anticipated. Zara's mind swirled with confusion as she tried to process the events of the last few hours, or was it days? Her eyes darted around the small room. It was plain, almost clinical, with a faint hum of technology vibrating through the air. The metallic walls reflected the dull light of a single overhead lamp, and there were no windows, no sign of the harsh desert she had just been abandoned in. The only thing that reminded her of the outside world was the faint smell of dust and wind still clinging to her clothes. The man who had saved her was sitting at the edge of the bed, watching her carefully. His presence was calm, yet there was something unsettling about the way he seemed to observe her, as if he were cataloging every movement she made. Zara was too disoriented to say anything, but his piercing eyes left an impression on her. They were calculating, but warm. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice smooth, though laced with a hint of caution. Zara tried to sit up but was stopped by a dull pain that shot through her ribs. She winced, lying back down. Her body was a map of bruises, cuts, and burns, each telling a story of the brutal crash. Her mouth felt dry, her tongue heavy, but she managed to croak out, "Where am I?" The man hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering to the door as though he was considering whether to give her the truth or a carefully crafted lie. Finally, he spoke. "You're on my ship," he said simply. "We're currently in orbit." "Orbit?" Zara whispered, trying to process the information. "I was, on a planet." He nodded. "The desert planet. You were alone, and I couldn't just leave you there." Zara's mind raced. It didn't make sense. Why would a stranger, someone she had never met before, go out of his way to save her? It didn't add up. The ship must have been far from the planet. He hadn't been close when she saw him on the horizon. The man seemed to sense her confusion. "I know this must be a lot to take in," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You've been through a lot. But you're safe now. Just rest." Zara couldn't rest. There were too many questions spinning in her mind. Who was this man? Why was he out here in the middle of nowhere, so far from civilization? And why had he come for her, of all people? "I don't understand," she muttered. You're not one of them, are you?" The man's eyebrows furrowed at the mention of them. He studied her with an intensity that felt unsettling, as though the question had struck a nerve. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're thinking of the others," he said, as though the word "others" carried an unspoken weight. "The ones who left you behind." Zara's throat tightened. She hadn't wanted to think about it, but the truth was, the crash had been no accident. She hadn't been the only one on the ship. She had been part of a crew, a group of people who had been traveling together, working toward a common goal. But when things went wrong, when the ship started to break apart, she had seen the others, her crew, make their decisions. And in the end, they'd left her to die. She felt a surge of anger. Betrayal. "They didn't care," Zara whispered, her voice trembling. "They just left me." The man's expression softened, though his eyes held a quiet, burning intensity. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said. "But you're not alone anymore." Zara studied him carefully. There was something in his eyes, a depth, a history, something that told her he understood more than he was letting on. His calm demeanor, his patience, it all seemed rehearsed. Too practiced. "I don't even know your name," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated, almost as if he was unsure of how to respond. For a brief moment, he looked away, then back at her, his gaze hardening slightly, as though the question itself had stirred something in him. "My name is Elias," he said, his voice steady. "But that's not important right now. What matters is that you're alive, and we need to focus on getting you back to full strength." Zara's mind buzzed with more questions, but she held them back. Elias had already given her more than she expected, but there was something else, something off about him. Why had he been on that desolate planet? And why was he so determined to keep her alive? As she stared at him, she realized one thing was clear: the truth was far more complicated than it seemed. The twist. The door slid open with a soft hiss, breaking the quiet tension in the room. Elias turned his head slightly, his expression shifting into something unreadable. A second figure stepped into the room. This one was different. It was hard to tell at first. This figure was wearing a long, dark cloak, but the features were unmistakably not human. Zara's eyes widened as the figure's shape came into clearer view. A humanoid, yes, but with strange, glowing blue markings along its arms and neck. Its eyes, a deep violet, locked onto Zara's in an almost predatory way. Elias' hand moved to the side, subtly positioning himself between Zara and the figure. "This is Zren," Elias said, his tone now more serious than before. "You'll need to trust both of us if we're going to survive what's coming." Zara's heart pounded in her chest. She had barely recovered from her injuries, and now there was another creature in the room, and she had no idea who or what it was. Zren's violet eyes flickered with something resembling amusement, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating stare. Zara's heart raced, her chest tightening in fear as the mysterious figure, Zren, stepped closer. She couldn't explain why, but something about its presence sent a shiver down her spine. Its movements were unnervingly fluid, almost graceful, yet there was a heaviness to the air whenever it was near. The glowing blue markings on its skin flickered in the dim light of the room, adding an eerie glow to the atmosphere. Elias, standing between Zara and Zren, seemed completely unfazed by the presence of the alien. In fact, his calm demeanor remained unchanged, though his eyes were sharp, constantly flicking back and forth between Zara and Zren. Zara, still recovering from her injuries, couldn't help but feel completely out of place. She had thought the desert had been her end, only to wake up in the middle of space, surrounded by people, or beings, whose motives she couldn't begin to comprehend. Was this some kind of rescue? Or was she being pulled deeper into something she couldn't escape from? Zren's voice cut through the silence, smooth and haunting. "We don't have much time," it said, the words floating in the air with an unsettling calmness. "The threat we face is not something we can outrun. It's something far worse." Elias turned towards Zren, his face unreadable. "You're sure? We've lost enough time already." Zren's violet eyes flickered briefly, a faint spark of anger in their depths. "We cannot afford to wait any longer. It is already here. If you think I'm exaggerating, take a look outside." Zara, struggling to sit up despite the pain, glanced at Elias for reassurance. He nodded and moved aside, his gaze never leaving Zren. Slowly, she looked towards the window, a panel that had remained dark and lifeless until now. With a hum, the panel flickered to life, revealing the vast expanse of space outside. Zara blinked, her eyes wide with disbelief. The view she had been expecting was not the one before her. Instead of the calm, empty stretch of space, what she saw was a swirling mass of shadows. Dark clouds coiled around distant stars, shifting like living things, moving closer to them with every passing second. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias looked grim. "That is the reason we had to leave the planet in a hurry. A fleet. One we can't outrun." Zren nodded. "It's a force unlike anything we've faced. They are coming for both of us, and soon, they will find us." Zara's mind struggled to keep up with the rapid pace of events. "Who are they?" "The Zatter," Elias answered, his voice heavy with the weight of years spent in hiding. "A ruthless race. They believe in absolute dominance, and they've already wiped out entire colonies. They're not just after us, they're after everything." Zren's voice was colder now. "And they won't stop until we're all dead." Zara's thoughts raced as she tried to digest the information. This was more than just a rescue mission. Elias and Zren weren't here to help her out of some random act of kindness, they were running from something far more dangerous. But why? And why had they chosen to save her? The questions piled up, but there was little time to dwell on them. Elias moved quickly to a console against the wall, his fingers flying over the buttons. A series of screens flickered to life, showing various readouts and digital maps of the surrounding space. "We need to move," Elias said. "We can't stay here. The Zatter will have us pinpointed in a matter of hours." Zara's body screamed in protest as she tried to stand, but the pain was too much. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed back onto the bed. Elias was at her side instantly, catching her before she could hit the floor. "Take it easy," he murmured, guiding her back down. "You're not ready to move yet. But we'll need you to hold on. We're going to need all the help we can get." Zren turned to Elias, its gaze narrowing. "We can't risk it. You know what the Zatter will do if they catch her." Elias sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I know. But I can't leave her behind." Zren's eyes softened, a brief flicker of understanding passing between them. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Then we fight. But we can't stay here." Zara swallowed hard, her mind reeling. She had gone from being stranded alone in a desert to now facing an intergalactic threat. And she had no idea how she could help. "I can't fight," Zara said quietly, the words almost a plea. "I don't know anything about any of this." "You don't have to," Elias said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But you can help us survive long enough to make it out of here. That's all we need right now." Zren stepped closer, its violet eyes never leaving Zara. "Survival is all that matters now. If you want to make it out of this alive, you'll need to trust us. No more questions, no more doubts. Just trust." Zara looked from Elias to Zren, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been abandoned once, left to die in the desert. But now, these two, these unlikely allies, had given her another chance. She didn't know if she could trust them completely, but for the first time since the crash, she felt like she wasn't entirely alone. And that, for now, would have to be enough. The alarm's shrill sound echoed through the ship like a death knell. Zara's heart raced, her breath shallow as she tried to push herself up again, despite the pain. But her body felt weak, every inch of her battered form protesting any movement. "Stay down," Elias said, his voice sharp but gentle as he pushed her back into the bed. "You can't help if you're not in condition to move." Zara bit her lip, frustration building inside her. She wanted to be useful, wanted to be strong, she didn't want to be the one who slowed them down. But the pain, the exhaustion, and the overwhelming realization that they were facing something beyond her comprehension made her feel small and helpless. Outside the ship, the Zatter fleet loomed, an inescapable threat. Every second counted now, and Zara could feel the weight of it in her bones. "We don't have much time," Zren said, its voice unnervingly calm, almost detached. It had been like that since they'd entered the room, its eyes flicking between the screens on the ship's consoles. "The Zatter's warships are fast. But they aren't as fast as we are." Elias glanced at Zren, then turned back to Zara. "We need you to hold on, Zara. There's no going back now." Zara nodded, taking in the gravity of the situation. There was no running, no escape. They had to face this. But how? "You're telling me we can outrun them?" Zara asked, still struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. She'd never even imagined that space travel, or battles, were even possible for someone like her. Zren's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not outrun. Outwit. They won't expect us to make this move." Elias moved to a large control panel, his fingers moving with precision as he activated a series of switches. The ship's lights flickered as a low hum reverberated through the hull. "We'll need to do something they're not prepared for," Elias muttered, his gaze focused entirely on the screen before him. Zara felt a pang of helplessness. She wished she could understand what was happening, but her lack of knowledge about space, the ships, or the alien enemies left her feeling like a bystander. Still, she refused to be useless. She had to contribute something, anything. "What are you going to do?" Zara asked, pushing herself up again, despite the protests of her body. Elias glanced at her, his face a mix of determination and grim resolve. "We're going to make them think we're dead. We're going to fake our destruction, and when they let their guard down, we'll make our move." Zren nodded in agreement. The Zadar are ruthless but predictable. They rely on brute force and overwhelming numbers. They'll assume we're too weak to survive their assault. We'll use that to our advantage. Zara took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing mind. She'd never been in a situation like this before, and her body still felt alien to her, her injuries throbbing with every movement. But she had to trust Elias and Zren. They were her only chance. "We need to stall them long enough for our counterattack," Elias continued, a faint edge of urgency creeping into his voice. "If we time it right, we can escape with minimal casualties." Zara nodded, still unsure how exactly she would be part of this plan. She'd never been trained for combat, never been in a life-or-death situation like this. But what choice did she have? If she didn't fight, she'd be dead anyway. As Elias worked the controls, the ship's engines hummed louder, and a low vibration ran through the metal beneath them. The air felt charged with tension, like the ship was holding its breath. Zren moved towards the back of the room, its eyes scanning the data feeds. "The Zadar will be here in minutes. If we don't act now." A sudden explosion rattled the ship, cutting Zren off mid-sentence. Zara gasped, clutching at the bed for support as the room shuddered violently. She could hear the faint sound of distant gunfire, but there was no time to process it. "They're here!" Elias shouted, his voice sharp with panic. Zren moved quickly, heading for a hidden panel along the wall. It slid open, revealing a set of blasters and weapons, high-tech tools that Zara could barely comprehend. Zren grabbed one and handed it to Elias, who examined it for a moment before strapping it to his belt. Zara's hands trembled as she realized the gravity of the situation. These weapons weren't for show. They weren't for self-defense. This was about survival. Elias and Zren were preparing for a battle they didn't know if they could win. "Zara," Elias said, his gaze softening, "I need you to do something for me." Zara's eyes widened. "What?" "There's a series of emergency beacons on this ship," Elias explained, his voice low. "I need you to activate them when the time comes. It'll send out a distress signal to anyone nearby, but we can't do it until we're ready." Zara hesitated, feeling the weight of the task pressing down on her. "What happens if I do it too soon?" Elias' eyes darkened. "Then the Zadar will know we're still alive. And they'll come after us with everything they've got." Zara's stomach dropped. She couldn't make that mistake. The pressure of it all was suffocating. Zren's voice cut through her thoughts. "They're getting closer. We need to prepare." Zara glanced at Elias, then back at Zren. She couldn't afford to freeze. Not now. Not when everything depended on her. She nodded, taking a deep breath. She would do whatever it took. The room trembled again, harsher this time, as though the very hull of the ship was groaning under the immense pressure. Zara clenched her fists, heart racing, every muscle in her body wound tight with tension. The Zadar were closing in, no more than moments away. Elias's face was set in a grim expression, his hands working furiously at the controls. He glanced back at Zara for a brief moment, but it was clear his focus was entirely on their survival. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice tight but calm. "When the ship shakes again, we're launching. Don't panic." Zara nodded, though every part of her wanted to scream. This was real. They were fighting for their lives. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Zren, still standing by the console, turned to them. They'll be on us in 5 minutes. Once they breach the outer shields, we won't have much time. Zara swallowed hard. What do we do? Zren's eyes locked onto hers with an intensity she hadn't seen before. We fight. We give them a reason to regret crossing our path. Elias's voice cut through the tension. We're not going to fight head-on. We're going to outmaneuver them. But it won't work unless we all play our part. The ship jolted again, throwing Zara off balance. She caught herself on a nearby railing, her mind racing. They were so close to the edge of a precipice, one wrong move, and it could all come crashing down. Zren had already activated a new set of controls, and the ship seemed to hum in response, a strange, almost otherworldly sound that filled the air. It was unsettling but also somehow reassuring. I've initiated the sublight propulsion system, Zren explained. We'll go straight for the asteroid belt. They won't follow us there. Zara felt a knot in her stomach. The asteroid belt was a dangerous region, full of jagged rocks and debris that could tear a ship apart if not navigated correctly. The Zatter, with their advanced technology, could undoubtedly track them there, but it was their best shot. What's the plan once we're in the belt? Zara asked, trying to stay focused despite the rising fear. Elias didn't look up as he worked. We'll make them think we're dead. We'll shut down everything, mask our life signs, and drift. The Zatter will assume we've been destroyed, and they'll move on. Zara's blood ran cold. She'd seen how ruthless the Zatter could be when they were certain they had the upper hand. If they believed they had won, there was no telling how much more damage they would do to anyone they deemed a threat. She glanced at Zren, who nodded. They'll leave us alone for a while, but it won't be permanent. As soon as we regain control, we'll move into position and make our escape. Zara's mind whirled with confusion. How were they going to survive long enough to make their move? How could she possibly help with something so high stakes? Before she could voice her doubts, Elias turned to face her, his expression softening for the first time since the alarms had gone off. Zara, there's something you need to know. Her heart pounded, the fear choking her throat. What is it? After we simulate our destruction, we'll need to move quickly, Elias explained. The Zatter are swift, but they're predictable. We have one chance, Zara. Just one. If we're wrong about this. Zara looked at him, dread filling her chest. What happens then? Elias didn't hesitate. Then we die. It was said with the calm finality of someone who had already accepted that truth. But Zara couldn't. She couldn't just accept that. Not after everything they had been through, not after everything they had risked. No, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but the resolve behind it stronger than she had ever felt before. I'm not going to let that happen. We're going to make it. We will. Elias's gaze softened, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something deep in his eyes, admiration, perhaps, or maybe just a fleeting spark of hope. It was enough to push her forward. Zren cut in. The Zatter ships are entering the asteroid belt. We're running out of time. Zara's blood ran cold. They were already here. The moments they had were slipping away. She had to act now. They all had to act. The ship rattled violently as the first blast struck their shields, sending shockwaves through every compartment. Zara's heart hammered in her chest, but she held her ground. This was it, the moment they had been dreading. The Zatter were here, and they weren't going to let them escape easily. Elias's voice came through the comms, steady and calm, despite the chaos unfolding around them. Zren, how much longer on those disarmaments? Zren's voice was terse but filled with urgency. 20 seconds, maybe less. We're not going to make it much longer. They've already breached our outer defenses. Zara felt her throat tighten. 20 seconds. In that time, they could be overwhelmed. The Zatter had technology that could break through almost any defense, and their soldiers were ruthless. She looked at Elias, his face set in grim determination. He had come too far for this to be the end. Zren's mechanical hands flew over the controls, trying to stop the countdown. If we don't manage to stop the bombs in time, we'll be destroyed in the blast. The Zatter will finish us off afterward. Zara's eyes darted around the room. There was nothing left to do but trust. Trust in Elias. Trust in Zren. And trust in herself. The countdown continued to tick. 15 seconds. The twist. Then, as if by sheer will, the comms crackled to life again, this time with an unexpected voice. This is Commander Kale of the Alliance Fleet. We've detected your ship's distress signal. Hold on. Zara's head spun. The Alliance? Were they really here to help? Or was this some kind of trap? Elias, she whispered, is this a trick? Can we trust them? Elias didn't answer immediately, but Zara saw his lips tighten. We don't have a choice. If they're here, we have a chance. The words didn't bring her comfort, but she had no time to second guess. The Zatter's ships were closing in, their weapons primed. It was their last shot. Zren, Elias called out, his voice tight, do you have any tricks left up your sleeve? We need something fast. Zren turned to them, his mechanical face reflecting the urgency of the moment. There is one option, but it's risky. We could overload the sublight propulsion system, use it as a weapon to disorient the Zatter. But it'll only work if we're quick. Zara felt her blood run cold. The risks were enormous. The plan had a chance of getting them killed, but it also had a chance of saving them. We don't have time to hesitate, Elias said, his decision made. Do it, Zren. Zren nodded, his eyes glowing with the intensity of the decision. With one swift motion, he activated the system. The entire ship groaned under the strain, and Zara could feel the weight of the risk in her gut. The final showdown. The ship trembled, lights flickering as if the entire structure was fighting against the forces being unleashed. Zren's hands worked rapidly, manipulating the controls to ensure they were ready for the next move. Now! Elias shouted. A blinding flash of light erupted from the sublight engine. The Zatter ships, which had been closing in on them, were suddenly thrown into disarray. Their weapons fire went wild, their ships careening through the asteroid belt with no control, smashing into each other in a series of explosive bursts. Zara blinked against the brightness, momentarily disoriented. She could hear the sounds of destruction, the echoes of the Zatter fleet being torn apart by the very weapon they had hoped to avoid. The impossible had happened. The gamble had paid off. We're not out of the woods yet, Elias said, his voice steady, though Zara could hear the strain beneath it. We need to move. Now. Zren's mechanical arms whirred, adjusting the ship's course. The Zatter had been dealt a devastating blow, but Zara knew this wouldn't be over until they were well out of the system. Take us to maximum speed, Zren, Elias ordered. Zren complied, and the ship surged forward, barely dodging the debris left by the Zatter's wreckage. They had made it, but not by much. The Alliance fleet was in pursuit, but Zara could see the faint outlines of the ships in the distance, offering the promise of salvation. Elias, Zara said softly, you did it. We did it. Elias turned to her, the weight of everything they'd been through hanging in the air. We're not out of it yet, Zara. We've still got a long way to go. But this is a victory. Zara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The adrenaline was fading, but the realization that they had survived, that they had outsmarted the Zatter, was beginning to settle in. As the ship sailed into the darkness of space, Zara leaned back in her seat, her thoughts swirling with the enormity of everything that had just happened. Elias stood by the viewport, staring into the vast emptiness of the stars. Zren's mechanical voice cut through the silence. "We've made it. For now." Zara turned to Elias, the man who had saved her life more than once, the man who had never given up. She had been scared, frightened of losing everything. But Elias had shown her that survival wasn't just about the ship or the technology. It was about the human spirit. "You were right," Zara said quietly. "It's not just about survival. It's about what you do with the chance to keep going." Elias turned to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. But as long as you keep fighting, you've already won." Zara nodded, knowing that the real victory wasn't just surviving, it was living, learning, and fighting for what mattered most. There would be more challenges ahead, but with every battle, she grew stronger. In the end, that was what made all the difference.